Hello, Dave.
Aloha, Sandy.
Aloha. Digging the shirt. Back
Thanks very
from
much.
back from vacation in Hawaii.
Yeah, that was quite a while ago, but
Yeah,
I'm still there. Part of me
I,
is still
I
there.
know you sound a little sad. Yeah,
I am really sad.
yeah. Well, welcome back.
Yeah. What are
Good
we
to see
talking
you.
about today?
And we are talking about how to start a coaching session. So, starting a session will be different for chemistry session, vision session, closure session. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to talk about your standard model 72A coaching session and how to start that in a way that is client led and all sorts of other good things. And this episode is part of a series. We're going to go through the entire structure of a coaching conversation. So, next up will be the agenda agreement. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, topic agenda agreement, which should come after the opening of the session.
Yeah. So, for today, opening a session. So, why is this an important topic? How to start a session?
Well, there's a lot of considerations. It's important to talk about the space and the moments leading up to when a client joins your session. And then the conversation starts and how that happens so that you're off on a good footing, and not letting that conversation go off in a potentially distracting direction. Um, One thing to notice is that starting happens really before you start a session. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on what you do before the session starts to prepare?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this because this wasn't on my mind at all, which maybe says something about my coaching, but it doesn't because when I wake up in the morning and I have coaching clients on my calendar, it's like that's when I begin. Like I'm very intentional about my day. But yeah, so how is a coach preparing themselves? How are they preparing their space, their environment? Before we started, we turned off our phones, although my landline, I have a landline, it's still plugged in. Hopefully it won't go off. That would be embarrassing. But yeah, unplug the phones, turn them off. Um, you think about your environment. Our door's closed. I have a door behind me. It is closed. That's my kitchen. I share with my housemate. Don't want to be interrupted. You want to corral those pets, corral the kids if you have them, and create that quiet, safe space for your coaching conversations. Um, yeah, what comes to mind for you, Dave, when you think about like even before the client steps into a session? What do you do?
Yeah, a lot of like what you have talked about. In the morning when I get up, I grab a cup of coffee, I roll through all my clients there. If there's some that are new, they sometimes send a little bit about what they want to talk about. So I kind of take a look at those and just keep them in my mind. I see some that are returning. That's great. Uh, take a note of when breaks are, just kind of the structure of the day, so that I have that internalized as I start the sessions. Something that you brought up, we should probably point out here is we're doing a lot of our sessions online. So a lot of the preparation in the space tends to be virtual. So I don't actually live in this place. This is one of, I don't know, 20 virtual backgrounds that I have. And so maybe I would want to pick one that is reflective of the session, or one that's reflective of what, how I feel, or what projection I want to make on somebody else. So there is that. Um, let's see. Your appearance, like what are you wearing? Aloha mood today. Okay. uh, is it a bad hair day, a good hair day?
Let me ask you, would you wear that
Yeah,
shirt, that lovely Hawaiian shirt for client sessions?
I might.
Yeah.
I try to not have a t-shirt on or that kind of thing, although that has
Mm.
happened. I try to be a little bit made up, so to speak. But sometimes, at least for the shirt, for example, it may be reflective of the way I coach. So maybe a
Mm.
little lightness there, a little bit happiness, a little bit maybe um, to keep things a little bit not so dark, I guess, in some ways, which often can happen in a lot of coaching sessions. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned dark, and I'm thinking lighting. And I won't go into
Oh,
my photography rant, but I have a big old light set up over there with a screen, so it's a soft filtered light. Which is why I look the way I do. It's all smoke and mirrors, people. But like, get some lighting. If you're working on Zoom all day, have some good lighting. Don't wear anything too distracting, unless that's your thing. I mean, be authentic. And yeah, that Hawaiian shirt for me, for you, that's authentic. That's Dave. Like, you're fun. You're light, and it's who you are.
thank you very much. I try to be fun.
Yes.
Yeah, that sparks potentially a need for a podcast on technology and all that stuff around us, and the lighting and all that kind of thing, which is fun to kind of get into
Mm-hmm.
to make yourself look good
Mm-hmm.
on screen. But that's part of the preparation. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, maybe other mental, emotional preparation might be useful too. Do you need to have a little space to ground yourself, to do some breathing, to calm yourself, to take a break even between clients? Um, what other tools might you need? Grab those, a notepad, pencil, pen. Are there any apps that you need? For example, sometimes we're playing on my side through Amazon Music, playing music to a session. So having that up and ready. So there could be other things as well.
You play music during a session? Tell me about that.
Yeah, for certain kinds of coaching sessions that I hold, it may be appropriate to set the mood through music.
Mm,
Yeah, to calm them down, to put them in a particular state so
right.
that they will respond in the way we want them to.
Got it. That's very cool. I guess we're doing different kinds of coaching here. Um,
We'll get into that later.
yeah, we'll get into that later. One thing you mentioned was when you get up and you look at your schedule and you look at the breaks and you look at the time between sessions. And I love that. I do that too. It's like, okay, I don't do back to back. I try to have at least 15, 20 minutes between sessions. And looking at that before I even step into my day, it's like, okay, there I can do this. There I can, go for a walk around the house and just ground myself, breathe, prepare for the next session. Um, but yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I like that to prepare yourself before even beginning a session.
Yeah, there's probably yet another podcast to talk about scheduling and how to arrange timing, and whether it's a 45-minute session, so it automatically gives you 15 minutes of break. And on the work that I do for the platform that I do a lot of coaching for, there are no breaks unless you build them in. So they are
Mm,
going from one session to another, boom, 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 boom. Now people are late getting on, so you have a 1 to 3 minute break maybe before they get on.
right.
So how and it's you get used to preparing in 1 to 3 minutes, which is kind of fun to do.
I'm sure you do. Yeah. Yeah. So getting to the actual session, your client steps into the room either physically or virtually or on the phone. So, what are your thoughts about like chit chat before a session? Like, hey, Dave, how's it going? How's your weekend? How was Thanksgiving? How's your son's birthday? La la la, chit chat. Like, what are your thoughts on that before starting a session?
Yeah, chit chat.
Mm-hmm.
Likely pros and cons to some of this small talk or introductory talk, where say a pro would be, "Hey, how you doing, Sandy?" And then that's rapport building, right? Helps you kind of have a nice entry into any kind of conversation. So there could be value there. The risk of that is they may go, "Oh, I went shopping with my dog, and I went to grocery shopping, blah blah blah," and all of a sudden, a large chunk of time in the session gets spent talking about someone's day, which may not have anything to do with why they were coming to the session in the first place.
Right.
So sometimes it's okay, and you can manage that. And there may be times when you might sense, "Oh, how are you doing right now?" That might be something you want to ask. But oftentimes it may be just better to just jump right in. ICF, for example, tends to support just jumping right in and reducing this kind of preamble, if you will, um, and just getting right down to it with some kind of lead into what do you want to talk about today, or what do you have for coaching, that kind of thing. Um, it does build up, bring up the task of building trust, safety, and rapport. So how do you do that if you don't start some kind of conversation? Um, that can be done as you're doing the session,
Hmm.
right? How you promote yourself, how you show up to the session, your conversation style, all that kind of thing. So it can be done if you don't enter into that and potentially exercise the risks of um, starting in that way versus just jumping right in.
Right. And trust and safety, that goes back to how you prepare yourself before a session. If your phone goes off in the middle of a session, the client's probably not going to feel safe or comfortable to continue their story if they're interrupted. Um, so, yeah, starting the session before the session even starts seems super important. Um, I know I tend to, maybe it's my Midwest nice. It is very hard for me to not do the chit chat, and it's getting better. Like, I'm more comfortable not doing it, and we'll talk about like the ways that we both open sessions a little bit later in today's episode. But especially clients that I've known for several sessions, and we have great chemistry, and it's like, hey client, how's it going? Like, no, no, no. That's a work in progress for me. But I'm not a fan of a lot of chit chat. When I hear it in sessions I listen to and I'm um, reviewing them, it's tough. So it's a good reminder for me too, to like, skip the chit chat.
Yeah, I hear you on
Um,
that, especially the clients that I've had for a while. It's
yeah,
almost natural, or it draws you to becoming more than just coach and client, because you get to know that person so deeply, and sometimes almost like a hint of friendship starts building. And so you have to watch out for that, that in this space someone's paying you, right, to get
yep.
something out of this session, and there is a business aspect to it, so it's important not to forget that.
Yeah, you are not their friend.
No.
And I have to remind myself of this all the time. And my therapist, Deb, I think I bring her up a lot. I don't know. I love Deb. But she, I've been seeing her for maybe almost 10 years, maybe over 10 years. Not, not every week, but a few times a year. And so we know each other, or rather, she knows me. I really don't know much about her, but I come to the session, I'm like, hey, Deb, blah, 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 blah. How are you? How was your weekend? And she is brilliant. And she says, well, the real question is, how are you? And then she just waits. And I'm like, right. I am paying for this. I don't care how you are. It's like, of course I care how she is, but it's such a good lesson. And I strive to incorporate that into my sessions. Like, it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about you. Um, what else? I know a lot of health coaches, holistic coaches, they like to start with breathing exercises, grounding exercises. This is a pet peeve of mine. I can't even tell you. I don't know why. Maybe I need some coaching around this,
Maybe you need some
but
breathing, I don't know.
maybe I need some breathing. Maybe I need some
There you
meditation.
go.
Um, uh, but I think it's mostly pet peeve because usually the client is not asked. Like, permission is not asked. Um, so it turns out to be very coach led, and the client's like forced into doing something maybe they don't want to do. Um, So yeah, and we have a mentor who calls this meditation bullying. Um, yeah, what are your thoughts on starting with those breathing exercises or grounding exercises?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. If it's coach led, that, oh, we should start by doing some breathing exercises, it's a little bit, I don't know, the client might not want it. right? Or need it. So, and if they're wondering like, why the heck am I doing breathing exercises right now? That can set the improper mood for the session if they feel like they're being dragged along somewhere they didn't want to go. Now, on the other hand, you might sense that the client might need it. Imagine a client rolling in, they're all harried, right? Maybe their hair's all kind of wild, they're taking off their jacket or whatever, and they're just like really agitated. Maybe you might suggest, hey, do you need a moment? And they may even prompt you like, I got to calm down or something like that. In which case that could be a good entry into doing something like a breathing, calming exercise
Asking permission
for the session.
first.
Asking permission first, though.
Yeah, I always ask
Checking with
like,
them.
yeah, what would be most helpful for you right now to fully arrive into this moment?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They might not know, and then, may I offer something?
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to do some breathing with me for a couple minutes? But yeah, keep it client led.
Yep. Yeah, it can be very simple to do that. It could just take one breath. Take a deep breath in, let it out. And that's it. That could be just enough to get them back, focused on the session. Um,
Right. I was going to say you mentioned this in the notes here, but these exercises take up time. I know I've listened to some sessions where it's like 3, 4, 5 minutes, and they're doing this exercise, and I'm like, you know, time is money, time is ticking. What amount of time is necessary for the client to be fully grounded and present?
or if they even want it.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point. So you and I are both health coaches. Um, and we were trained by most of the mentor coaches to check in. And I can see this might be helpful within a practice if you're working for a doctor or a company where they want results and they want data and they want to qualify, like, okay, is this working? Like, what did the client do over the past week? This is what they did. There's a way to do that where it's client led, but in your opinion, David Shen, is checking in necessary?
Lots of thoughts on that.
Oh boy. There we go.
The first one is the really engaged clients will do the check in automatically, I found. They take a lot of notes and they read those notes and they do whatever actions they wrote down, and they're eager to report on them when they come into session. So I'll go, hey, what are you bringing to coaching today? And then they go, oh, well, last time I see we talked about this and that went well, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wow. It's like, that's what I love to hear, that they're engaged and they're ready to go. Right. Then I didn't really have to check in because they were engaged and they wanted to show that they did it or had problems doing it, in which case that would have been great topics for coaching.
Sounds like this is a really a coachable client. See episode 4 on coachability.
There you go.
Yeah, that's a coachable client when they're engaged, right?
Yeah, definitely so. It on that note, it could also signify that someone is not fully engaged when they don't talk about the things we talked about last time, the homework that we might have agreed upon that they were supposed to do, or they even forgot about it. Like, oh, I didn't bother trying. And that can also mean that, well, did we check properly that this thing was something they were willing to do, that they were found value in it, bought into it, resonated with it, and that they weren't just kind of saying, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And then they don't do anything after the session. But at least they showed up next time to tell you that, which is nice.
Right.
Oftentimes they just don't show up at all, which is not so desirable.
Yeah. I'm going to make a note of this when we talk about planning and support and even evoking, like that part of the coaching conversation, like figure out what they want to do, where they're going. So when you're planning those action steps, tangible or not, and that support, it really connects with them. Because if it doesn't, yeah, they might not want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, there are probably instances where it's valuable for, I hate when people bring this up. Why are you here? Well, I need coach accountability. And I'm like, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I'm okay with that for a little while, but at some point, I don't want you to see me anymore, and you shouldn't have to see me anymore. You should be able to do this yourself.
Right.
So it's okay in the beginning, but that might be helpful to help organize their goals and to keep reminding them. So referring back to why did you show up in the first place? Um, Especially for longer engagements, it may be helpful to have some sort of record, or even having you refer to back, so you can help remember, oh, how does this relate to goal number 3 that we set months ago, or that kind of thing. Or have those goals shifted, and then you can kind of have another discussion about maybe we should have another goal setting meeting and all that kind of thing. But um, yeah, sometimes it's valuable to keep referring back to why they were here in the first place. Because if they start drifting, they may lose that initial energy of why they signed up for you in the first place.
Right. Right. And those are a couple competencies you mentioned for the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching, referring back to the vision, which, maybe you did or didn't do that. And also long-term goals. Like, yeah, why are you here? Why are you here, client? What the heck do you want? But reminding them of why they came to coaching. And there's a way to check in, and I'll share how I start every single session later in this episode. But even if they are engaged and they didn't do what they were going to do, or they're not engaged, and they're just kind of brushing everything off, like that's a great opportunity for coaching. What did you learn? What will you do next time? A lot of information can be gleaned in those first couple of minutes about the client and what they want to do and where they want to go with the coaching.
Yeah, it's great points. It's great information for you as a coach. It's like, something was off from the last session. I'm glad they're still here, but why didn't whatever we agreed upon that they were going to do or work on, why did they forget about it? What's
Mm-hmm.
behind that?
What's that about?
Yeah, what's that about?
It's my favorite question. What's
There
that
you
about? It's really snarky. I always say it like that. What's that about?
go. They must love that.
I don't say it like that. I don't say it like that. But so I wanted to ask you about your situation working for a big coaching company that has 30-minute sessions. So when you start these sessions, is it different than your private one-on-one clients, how you start that session?
Well, in my case, it's not different. I tend to minimize chit chat and just hop right in. And if you only have 30 minutes, then there really is a need to just dive right in and get to the meat of whatever you're going to talk about, because you need every second to deliver what the client wants for that session. Yeah. So any chit chat around that is just going to take away from that. And I've had a lot of mileage with 30-minute sessions now, so that's great and everything. But I would be the first to say that I am still not skillful in that time frame, and it's tough to get as many clients as you can to a good closure point in 30 minutes.
Yeah, that must be a challenge.
Yeah. So no chit chat. Let's just get right to the point. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And get done so we don't spill over into the next session after that.
Mm-hmm. Time is money.
Yeah. So you do a lot of student session reviews, PSA reviews, and all that. Yeah, what do you see in those sessions that are relevant here?
Yeah, new coaches. I I see a lot of new coaches leading, and it can be really subtle, or it can be pretty blatant. But there's a lot of coach leading the client, especially at the start of the session. Like we talked about earlier, not asking permission to do those grounding exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And even asking permission, it's like, is that what the client wants? You don't start a session with like, would you be open to doing some breathing? It's like that's still kind of coach led. One thing I notice that you mentioned earlier is new coaches miss those energy cues. Like you said, if a client comes in all frazzled or tired or looks like they've been crying, I invite new coaches to slow down and notice that. And you don't have to ask them what's wrong, because that gets into chit chat and that gets into story. But you can just notice it and say, I'm noticing your energy is a little scattered right now. What do you think? And they might offer why. Um, and then you can invite them, like, would it be, what would be most helpful for you right now to settle into this session? And sometimes maybe they're not even in a place to be coached. Hopefully they're honest enough to tell you that and be like, you know what, I just need to go cry. And that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. That's fine. We honor that. Um, and another thing which we already talked about, is not giving clients a choice, starting that session. Um, Positive psychology is kind of drilled into our brains, and starting a session with, what's one thing that went well for you last week? Yeah, you're laughing. I hate this question with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. I hate it. I hate it because it pushes the client into a positive space. Maybe they don't want to be in a positive space. It's okay. Maybe their cat just died. Maybe they have a cancer diagnosis. Maybe they lost their job. Um, to just not acknowledge that side of them is not client led and can do more harm than good, I think. Um, I I was going to share a story about my dad. I'll try to make it short, but there was a time I was taking part in this coaches mastermind with 5 other coaches, and we'd meet every month. And my dad, who I'm not close with, there's like family issues up the wazoo. I mean, it's messy. But anyway, he's in his 80s. He has health issues, and heart issues, and he fell and broke his ankle. And it was like 2 weeks in the hospital, and then 3 months in rehab, and then he got COVID in rehab. And I'm going up to Wisconsin every weekend helping my mom, and it was like all this stuff. And then he came home, and he couldn't do anything for himself. So I was literally cleaning up shit. And excuse my language, and sorry for those of you who are eating right now, but it was occupying every moment of my being to help my mom and to be there for her, as well as care for my dad. And I finally made it back to one of these group coaching sessions, and the person leading it that month decided to start the session by asking, what's one thing that went well for you this past month? And they were going around the room, and I was thinking, like, okay, what's one thing? Just one thing? Okay, what? And I could not come up with anything. And when they got to me, I just burst into tears. I burst into tears. And it's like, yes, okay, there's lots to be thankful for. I was like, I'm thankful my parents are still around, thankful I'm close enough I can visit them. But it's like, I'm sure there's lots of things that went well, but my mind wasn't there. And that was kind of a turning point for me as a coach, because I never asked that question again in my sessions, because I was like, I feel you. I feel your pain. I want to acknowledge the whole person that you are, not just the positive side. But anyway, that's my dad's story. And going back to like health coaches asking, starting a session with like, so how did your goals go last week? What do you want to share about your goals? Which is very coach led. Um, perhaps ask, what, if anything, do you want to share that's happened this past week? And that leaves it open for them to talk about their goals or not. Or maybe nothing happened, which is fine too.
Yeah, so many great points. Um, yeah, the dad story is um, very important to remember, because I remember way early on in my training, we had talked about asking about, oh, what was one thing, great thing that happened for you or what you did? And the risk is, like you said, that client may not have anything positive that comes to mind or good coming to mind. And then all of a sudden you just took that session down a road where you'd have to kind of recover from, right, in order to
Mm-hmm.
bring it back on track. And we've talked about spending time doing chit chat and all that kind of stuff. This could also be one of those, but also now we have emotional aspects to it that are
Right.
layered on top of it. So not only recovering from chit chat, you're talking about stuff that may turn them into I don't know, a state less receptive to what they were there for and coaching in the first place.
Right. And you mentioned building trust, safety, and rapport. That just went out the door, right? Because now I don't feel safe sharing what is truly, honestly present on my mind, which is my parents' health and all that went around with it. I mean, I really condensed that story for y'all, so it's like it's been a lot.
Mm.
But I mean, is what it is. But to dismiss all that, it's like I'm back here now. I'm like, I don't feel I don't feel
Yeah,
comfortable sharing with you because you're like anyway, pet peeve, pet peeve. Yeah.
hear you on that.
Yeah. So let's talk about some examples of how we start a session. You want to go ahead?
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this before. Coaching sessions are maybe a unique form of conversation, and so that therein lies the awesome parts of it and the risky parts of it, which is if you're just chit chatting, like as if you're out on a having a coffee with a great friend of yours. Well, that was conversation, and that's fine, but it's not a coaching session necessarily. But it's also a business transaction too. They are paying you most of the time. Right? You might have a pro bono session, but they want to get something from you, right? Coaching, right? Reaching their goals or resolving something they're experiencing, whatever it is, and every second counts. So, some of the openers that we've heard, and definitely if jump in when you have some,
Mhm.
but something just quick like, what do you bring to coaching today? What's on your mind for our session today? What would be most supportive for you to discuss today? What would you like to be coached on today? Yeah.
Yeah, variations on a theme. I'll add to that last one. What would you like to be coached on today that would be of value to you? Kind of hones it in even a little bit more. Like, what would be most valuable for you? I already mentioned above earlier how I start every single session, and I learned this from the Health Coach Training Institute, and I'll leave a link for that down below. They have an advanced course for if you're a new coach looking for to deepen your practice. They have a really cool advanced course that I just took. Um, but I now start every session with what would, oh, I'm sorry, where am I looking here? I lost my place in our notes. I'm off track, Dave. I didn't even write it in there, but I know what I say. I say, is there anything you'd like to share or clear before we step into coaching? And that gives them lots of space to be like, yeah, my cat just died, or this or that. Uh, Honestly, more often than not, they're like, no, I'm good. And then I ask them, so what would be of value for you today for us to work on in this session? Um, but yeah, and I also want to add, like, when you do this from the very start of a relationship with a new client, it's like they will learn. They'll learn. Like, repetition is key. So it's like, hello, client. Do you have anything to share or clear before we begin today? No? What would you like to be coached on? Boom, boom, boom. And then they know at some point I will also ask them what they want to get out of the session. And we'll talk about that in our next episode when we talk about setting the agenda and the agreement and everything. Um, but yeah, any other thoughts on opening a session?
What's still, I love your therapist. which he
Yeah.
said, it's like, it's not important what I think, but what you think. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I love that. I have to,
Yeah. I mean,
I have to,
she's so smooth. It's just like, the real question is, how are you? And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, how am I? She's smooth. She's smooth. She's been doing it for many years. She's good.
well, I'll have to aspire to her smoothness.
Yes, that's
I
right.
love it.
That's right. Well, I think that's it for this episode. What do you think? Any other thoughts?
No, if we start talking more, we'll be jumping into the next podcast. So let's
Yeah, I
leave it
think
for that.
so. All right. Wrap it up.
Uh, yeah, we'll leave some resources in the show notes as always. And where can people find you, Sandy?
SwansonCoaching.com. What about you, Dave?
CoachDshen.com.
Awesome. Good to see you. Aloha. We'll see you
Aloha
next
to you too.
time. All right.
Bye,
Thanks, Dave.
everyone. See you next time.
Bye.